Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2026-27 school year. And to start off our new school year, I have just what everybody's always wanted, new laws. But honestly, this coming year, we have several laws that principals need to be aware of, need to be prepared for. And maybe unlike some previous years when all we think about is what work are these new laws going to require, this year I have some things that might make possible changes for your building and your students that are truly positive, and that if you're prepared for it and can use it as leverage, you can truly make a difference for your kids in this upcoming school year. That includes things like cell phone restrictions and some significant changes to the state's merit exam laws. So let's get going into the review so you can be best prepared for the upcoming school year. I want to start with cell phone restrictions because this is probably the biggest new law taking effect this school year. It's going to require that your local school board adopt a wireless device policy that restricts device use during instructional time. You can have local rules that are more stringent, that expand when devices are restricted, that say that it's not just during instructional time, but at a minimum, your policy has to restrict device use during instructional time. Districts are also going to have to update their emergency operations plans in response to this new law. So let's go through the details of what this looks like really quickly. The policy your district adopts has to, at a minimum, restrict wireless device use on school grounds during instructional time. Note that wireless device is defined pretty broadly. It's not just cell phones, it can also include smartwatches, tablets, anything that can connect to the internet. You have to, in your policy as a school district, provide details regarding enforcement mechanism. That doesn't have to be super specific. It could simply say that the new policy will be enforced pursuant to the student handbook or pursuant to administrator discretion based on the circumstances. You do need to provide some specific exemptions, but they're the exact kind of things that school districts are going to want to provide exemptions for anyway. Things like medical device usage, where students using their cell phone to check their blood sugar or something similar to that. But it's the sort of thing for which you're probably going to have a doctor's note, and things will be pretty cut and dried. The statute at its core respects your discretion. It doesn't prescribe enforcement. It seeks to give you tools that you can then use rather than backing you into a corner where you are stuck making tough decisions with very little flexibility. You are going to have to update your emergency operations plan to include a protocol for when and how pupils are permitted to use wireless communications devices during an emergency. But understand that the requirement is clarity, not access. Nothing precludes you from very simply having a policy that says no cell phones are allowed during emergencies. Again, it's about letting people know what the expectation is, not guaranteeing them access to their cell phone. Second big change that's coming this year deals with the Michigan Merit Exam. Beginning immediately, districts are no longer required to include Michigan Merit Exam scores on students' transcripts. So I'd be going in to start the school year and making sure that our transcript system didn't include any scores on the transcript. Because if you have students that want to apply test optional to a college and you're sending along those test scores, whether they want them or not, that takes away their choice. And that's something you have control over and can handle up front. Beginning this coming spring, students will no longer be required to take the SAT essay, and parents will be allowed to opt their students out of the work skills portion of the merit exam. That's the WIN test now. Together, if you fully maximize these two things, no more SAT essay and an opt-out on the WIN test, you've reduced testing time for 11th graders by up to 4 hours. And for the first time, we're allowing truly test-optional college application. As you're planning to implement all of this, it's worth noting that the SAT essay elimination is automatic. Nothing you need to do about it. But that work skills test opt-out requires a waiver. You're also going to have to send home a letter that the Department of Education is still in the process of building. While the form for the waiver and the letter are still under development, we do know the deadlines. The waiver has to be accepted up until February 28th, and you have to have sent the letter no later than December 31st. But within those boundaries, you have a lot of flexibility. And really the decisions you need to be making right now are when and how you're going to send home the opt-out and when and how you're going to send home the letter. For example, if you think that more students should opt out and you want to highlight that for parents, maybe you make that a special email home, or you put it in the beginning of your paperwork, and then you follow up with families that haven't filled out the opt-out that you think should. And then you include the letter sometime later in the year, maybe not make as big a deal out of it. This is an opportunity, again, where you have discretion on how you're you're going to handle it, and you as a school administrator can choose what you think is going to work best for your students. Beginning this year, the requirement for behavioral threat assessment and management teams and training goes fully into effect. I think at this point, most schools, if not all schools, have a behavioral threat assessment and management team in place in every building and have gotten training for those folks. But if not, this year is when the requirement goes into place. Those teams need to be in every building and need to include at least the building administrator, a mental health professional, and an SRO or local law enforcement officer. There are lots of resources out there for training and planning. MASSP has done 2 different articles that walk you through and give you a play-by-play on how you need to scale up in order to have these things in place. And the MSP Office of School Safety has a variety of resources and training. So be aware of those things and get yourself prepared for the upcoming school year. The last big law coming this year that you need to be aware of and be prepared for is that you will no longer need to handle work permits out of the high school office. That responsibility is shifting to the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity coming October 1st. 2026. We are still working with the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity on exactly what that transition is going to look like, and we're awaiting some more details, but they're going to be putting in place an electronic process for students and parents that they can access online, and that'll be something that your students and parents will be able to do without any reference to you. So one less thing on your desk for the upcoming school year. Beyond preparing for new laws for the upcoming school year, the other thing that school administrators need to be aware of and prepared for is what the upcoming year's school budget is going to look like. And this came out late in the process, right before summer break, so it's entirely possible that you haven't yet gotten your head around the details on that. So let's walk through really quickly what the legislature ended up passing, what it looks like, and what it's going to mean at the building level. There are 5 things you need to know about the budget that passed in June of this year as you prepare for the upcoming school year. The first is that we got a 2.5% or $250 per pupil foundation increase. The second is that there is more and better weighted or needs-based funding in place in this budget than we've ever had before. The third is that we've shifted the way we're going to be counting pupil count to emphasize enrollment stabilization for districts with declining enrollment. Fourth is that the mental health funding that's part of that mental health and safety funding is no longer going to require the waiving of constitutional rights. And the fifth one, unfortunately, is that more school aid dollars have been diverted away from K-12 spending in this budget. For that foundation increase, we're talking $250 per pupil or 2.5% more. That brings the foundation up to $10,300 per pupil. Unfortunately, though, that is sub-inflationary. While it's still an increase, and we're not going to say that there shouldn't have been any increase, when we don't keep pace with inflation over time, the value of the foundation drops. And that graphic you can see there on the right is the value of Michigan's foundation allowance or allowances adjusted for inflation over time. And the problem with not making at least an inflationary increase is that we're now losing value. And that's what's been happening for 30 years. So we're going to be continuing to beat on this and making sure that folks know that every year the foundation allowance has to at least increase by inflation so that schools can keep up. Fortunately, though, we saw some significant increases in weighted funding this year. We got 20% increases in at-risk and ELL funding. For at-risk students, that means that every one of those students gets an extra 19 to 26% of their foundation allowance per economically disadvantaged pupil. And that exact percentage varies by opportunity band. For English language learner students, that's an extra 2 to 19% of foundation per English language learner pupil. And that exact percentage is determined by a student's individual WIDA score. In addition to that, the budget simplified boilerplate requirements and reduced a lot of compliance monitoring and reporting tied to those dollars, those at-risk and ELL dollars, which is going to give districts a lot more discretion in how to spend the money and a lot less checking on the back end to make sure that they're allowed to do what it is that they want to do with those dollars. And it wasn't just at-risk and ELL that saw increases. CTE added costs, early middle college, rural and isolated district funding, GSRP early on, all of these saw 10% increases overall. And so while those line items remain in place and the boilerplate requirements or restrictions remain in place for each of those funding sources, the overall amount of funding increased by 10%. That's pretty significant as well. Pupil count in the state of Michigan has been declining significantly over the last several years. This past school year, we're projected to have lost something like 12,600 pupils overall, and next year we're projected to continue losing at a similar pace, another 11,000 to 12,000 next year, and another 14,000 the year after that. So in order to buffer the impact of declining enrollment on districts, the state has shifted the pupil count methodology for the upcoming school year. Districts will get the greater of either their current year enrollment or the average of their prior 3 years of pupil membership. For districts that are seeing declining enrollment, that will significantly buffer their year-over-year pupil loss and will ensure that every district in the state, growing or shrinking, can set their budget for the upcoming year with knowledge of at least their prior 3-year average pupil count. That's going to give you some budgeting certainty, and that's a pretty significant relief when you're trying to set a budget for the upcoming school year and you're not sure what your pupil count's going to be. For several years now, we've been getting mental health and safety money from the state. It's been a $300 million pot of money, and sometimes it's more flexible, sometimes it's been less flexible. And last year, there was boilerplate added around waiving legal privilege in order to access those dollars. This year, the legislature retained some of that problematic boilerplate, but not all of it. The pot of money got split into two pieces. There's now a $200 million pot for school safety grants that retains the problematic boilerplate. On the other hand, though, there's a $100 million piece of that specifically for mental health that requires no waiver. So that shift is pretty significant and important for that $100 million piece. The big worry underpinning the entire budget, though, this year is that the state has significantly increased the school aid diversion. That is, money that's in the school aid fund that should be going to K-12 education that's no longer going to K-12 education. That increased by $630 million this year over what we spent in 25-26 and brings the total to $1.9 billion of total diversion for the state. Now, while that money is going to community colleges and higher ed, it's not like those budgets are seeing a significant increase. Overall, their appropriations are declining just as overall school aid appropriations are declining. The real challenge with that is that as we continue to divert more and more money out of the school aid fund away from K-12 spending and to other things like higher ed and community college spending, what we're really doing is balancing the state's general fund budget on the back of the school aid fund. So rather than debating about whether or not we should be spending K-12 dollars on higher ed or community colleges, what we really need to be doing is having a larger discussion about how we're funding our schools broadly and whether or not we're raising and generating enough revenue to do so.